Welcome to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast. I'm your host, Kojo Bafun, and this podcast is an extension of my book, also called Listen to Your Footsteps, which is a collection of essays, reflections, and poetry on things like fatherhood, identity and belonging, growing up, creativity, and the lessons learned. The purpose of this podcast is to gain insight and learn from the journeys that others have taken. I explore the worlds of art, culture, design, business, creativity, and life from the perspective of Africans who are contributing to the redefinition of the continent and who we are. My guest for today is a filmmaker who does everything: produce, direct, write, and he's also an archive researcher, a record collector, a father, a partner, and a friend. His name is Sifiso Khanyile. Welcome, Sifiso.
So just very quickly, just a very short story. I, in 2015, even earlier, 2014, 2013 even, we decided to move into Maboneng. We had our offices there. So, we weren't just dropping in and out, for, social purposes, but we were stationed there. Our offices were there. We had this association called ATFT, which is the Association for Transformation in Film and Television. So being there a lot of the time, having meetings there, going for lunches there, whatever, meant that we saw those kind of interactions between, the Maboneng, I would say target audience or target market, and the people who were street away. And I think that it made for an interesting anthropological study and I think that it has to, I feel like there's a lot of this speaks to South Africa. There's a bigger story about South Africa there between just looking at the country through class and class relations. Is that even during the week, when we went out for coffee, this is on a Tuesday at 10 a.m., there's this invisible wall between, the people where the space was almost impenetrable for them, where they just literally just be walking on the pavement, looking around, and then maybe sometimes even just like crossing the street because, there's just people sitting out in the pavement. And for them, maybe it was intimidating. I mean, I won't speak for what the effects were.
Yeah.
But then there was specific times where it's like month end, and a month end on a weekend, and it's a Friday night, and people are drunk, and they're just like either, come walking down, just like shouting, making a noise, just, expressing the excitement. But secondly, coming down in taxis with like these taxis that were open and them just like jumping in and out of the taxi, making a noise, playing the music very loud. And it felt like, there's that, obviously the sense of oppression of like, I don't belong here, or this space is kind of rejects me in some ways. And also then the forced participation or,
yeah.
Like, okay, now I'm going in.
But also trying to claim your...
reclamation.
Feeling inadequate or feeling like you don't belong, but a part of you kind of goes, why don't I belong? It's my neighborhood, it's my space. I'm going to show that I belong, but also not knowing how to...
Yeah, because it seems...
how to take ownership or claim ownership of your little space within that.
Yeah, it seemed confrontational. It reminded me of a time when I was in I think it's still the most expensive suburb in Joburg, just past Illovo, the other side. Sandhurst.
Okay, yeah.
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 I was lost and I was walking that day, and this is a public road, and a guy came to ask me what I was doing there, a security guard. And those things are always just such a mindfuck because, especially when you know that this is a public road and, just because there's a boom gate, it doesn't mean that, I can't be here. But also I'm being profiled. And in that moment, I also have enough grace to understand his position, that, he's doing what he was told to do. But yes, at the same time, wanting to sort of like, raise him up to the, to consciousness politics, where I'm just like, look, this is how things operate, and this is your part, and it starts and ends here, and this is where I come in. And it's tiring. Just those spatial politics about, what legitimizes or delegitimizes your presence in any space. And I drive through Sandhurst, maybe 20 times a year. and I'm fine. I don't even think about it. But that day I had to walk, and I was quickly reminded of sort of my place in the society in a very, sort of abrupt fashion. And in that sense, you also now have to kind of come to terms with where we are as a country and where we come from. And it's all sort of like you have to gaslight yourself into not being angry or upset. You just constantly,
But also realizing that, like, because you had to walk, so you may have driven through it, but in driving through it, that is a different signal. So for the security guards seeing you driving, if it's seen you driving through, also depending on what you're driving, it changes the perception. It changes your experience of the space, because you're also not really you're not really interacting with it. In the visceral way that you were walking.
Yeah, because there's I think when you're walking, there's also a curiosity. I mean, you probably look into people's yards a bit more. I mean, there's manicured trees that are quite fascinating there. So there's all kinds of things. But I also bring the space up to maybe just, premise a conversation about archives, because I work a lot with archives.
Well, by the way, we've already started.
Yeah, I guess so.
We've already started I think it's poignant that you talk about archiving, because it's something that I do want to explore. Because my first question was actually going to be, what are the rabbit holes? What are your favorite rabbit holes? Especially, let's say right now. Let's start. Like, what are the rabbit holes that are just consuming you now?
I think South African cultural history archives, and it's small details. I think there's a way in which a lot of history, we all know a lot of it was documented by white men with a particular agenda also. But even the ones who didn't have an agenda, there were kind of like a few shortcomings in as far as like representation is concerned.
Because of the lens.
Because of the lens. Because of the gaze. Thank you.
Regardless of whether there was a deliberate intention.
Yeah.
The lens by nature will determine kind of how you communicate something.
Yeah, there's a lot of limit in the stories that they told, and the stories that survived. So the stories that went out and the stories that weren't told. So, it's just, finding out a greater, or a broader participation of certain individuals in our cultural history, connecting the dots. So you might find that there are missing individuals in a story, or there is a part of the story that they, didn't tell or didn't express fully. So those kind of things where I'm able to connect the dots to be like, this record that I collected that's sitting in my shelf that has all these, credits, but for some reason you're not told that, the backing vocals are, these women or, these people. And then you see a video, and then you see them in studio, and then you see that, oh snap, look at who's singing there. It's it's not captured on the record. And also, I'm a big record collector, by the way. As much as I work with like sort of audio-visual archives, and music is sort of a way of thinking, and it's kind of like a technological tool for me to resolve a lot of things, whether emotional, psychological, or just like, thinking through like my practice. It sort of aids a lot. And so it's always like one of the first entry points for me into anything. And it always kind of it's very quick to grab my attention. So I'll watch a video that I'm not particularly interested in because I've seen so many, archive clips of South Africa, of Soweto, of the struggle. There's a lot of things I'm sort of, not immune, but desensitized to, where now it's just like, I have to make it work for whoever it is that I'm making it work for, right? As an archive researcher and archival producer. But there's things that will stand out. A friend of mine actually said to me that one day you'll know that you'll reach the end or the pinnacle of your archive research work when you see yourself in the clips, And so one of the things that happened, so I'll go on, websites, read historic papers, out of those historic papers, get titles for films, for records, look for them online, find them. This one time, I'm just going to tell you a quick story. I found a shop in town that was selling SABC title DVDs, like old films.
Are
like,
you serious?
Yeah, but online. And the SABC was selling them, but they hadn't put an online store. And these guys, Impact Video, I think they were called, were selling them online. So I ordered a bunch of titles, and I remember there was Kateli Mnyama and Uteliwe. Uteliwe is the first feature film in this country to be directed by a black director, Simon Savela. And Inyaga Nyaga, those films were sort of popular. They were like our version of blaxploitation. They belonged to what's called the B Scheme films in South Africa. One of them is a Lucky Dube film called Tolindla, Get Lucky. Right? And this is Lucky Dube pre-Rasta Lucky Dube, when he still had like a German cut and he was like super skinny.
Yeah.
I kid you not. So the thing is, I don't remember if those guys delivered, if I just make the choice to, or I think I did, ask for delivery, but it just was taking too long. But I remember deciding to go to town, and I took an Uber and went into the store, got my DVDs. On my way out, bought I'm a keep, like I'm a Skopas.
Yeah.
And went home. It was like a midweek afternoon. I was free. I watched. So I decided to put the Get Lucky DVD and laptop at the time had a DVD slot. I smoked a blunt. I sat down with my Skopas and I watched this Lucky Dube film from like 1972 or something. And in the film, at some point, there's a shot where I see my older brother, Nhlanhla. This is my brother who, was part of my, upbringing.
Yeah.
He's like, our firstborn at home. And I'm like, no way. It must be the weed. He's 57 now.
Yeah.
I think he'll be 58 this year. And this was shot in the early 70s. So you can imagine, he was like, I don't know, 12, 15.
Yeah.
He was born, no. This was probably late 70s. He was born 1967.
Yeah.
So he was around 12. So it must have been 79, 1980 when the film was released. And I spot him in the film. I'm like, no way. I pause. I'm like that. So I'm just, with the laptop rewind thing, it's not very accurate, right? So I keep missing the parts, but now I smoked a blunt, so I don't know if because I'm not getting to the part that I wanted. And I'm just like, wait, the scene happened here at this club outside this, it was like a community hall where Lucky Dube was meant to perform. And I was like, wait, it's here, they're outside. And then I eventually find it and I just keep replaying and I'm like, there's no way. I take a screen, like a photo with my phone, send it to him. I'm like, hey, this is you. No matter who says what, this is you. And he said, yeah, that's me. He says, oh, I've never told you this, but when we were kids, we lived in Alex with granddad. And these guys from Orange Grove used to come with Lillian Dube on Saturdays. And all they did was basically park outside a place and they'd say, okay, we're looking for extras for a film. We'll take 15 of you. And then we'd all sort of rush. We'd get dressed and then we'd all get ready because we never knew when they were coming. But they would come on a Saturday morning. And then we'd all rush into this van. And if you were the first ones to make it, they'd just close the door and count and, write your names down. And he says we used to get paid 50 rands and it was a lot of money. He says it was like a lot of money. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. So now you have film studios in Orange Grove. You have Lillian Dube. You have my brother. You have me. in one moment, in a single story. And so for me, it's like the greatest bits of archive research and, working with archives is when I can make when there are these kind of intersections, where it's like, it doesn't always have to be related or closely related to me, but where I can just make connections like, oh, when this guy started this band or when they were performing, when they were recording this album, this is when the 1976 planning, there's an album called Chapita by Dick Khoza, for example, and it was recorded in Soweto on June 15 and 16 in 1976. And so, they spoke about how while they were recording, they saw some of them, sort of like plan the event of 1976, like coming out of meetings and gathering and street corners and that kind of thing. So, it's just like one single microcosmic moment that's also sort of that's part of like witness to a much, much bigger event that, is commemorated today as Youth Day, and it's, it'll go on as long as I don't know, as this country exists. But there are different perspectives that a lot of people don't know about. And I think that, just those are the things I sort of like geek out on.
Where was the seed planted for that? Like,
it's
how do you get to, at what stage, at what age you kind of go, I like rabbit holes.
It's so weird. I had a British friend who used to, he called me a train spotter, and he was like, "Oh, so you're like a train spotter." And for me, train spotting had like two references, and it's either the heroin reference, and also like literally the guy who goes and sits in front of trains and counts them. And he said, no, it's it's kind of like slang and euphemistic for anyone who likes like rabbit holes, like just geeking out on something or collecting stamps or and I was like, wow, that's interesting. But I didn't realize that I had kind of like an almost obsessive way of like my love for things. Sorry, I'm this is muddled up, but I'll get to the answer. But I think there's a bit of dyslexia at school, and I had to rely on my memory a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, for just to navigate the world. So remembering things was always important to me, even as a kid, whether it's remembering numbers or... So I'd learned by memorizing things. Everything was about memory and memorizing, to the point where, I used to get in trouble in friendships and in relationships because I remember everything and then I'd use it as a reference, but then it would come across as a grudge, right? So I still have that in my marriage today, where it's just like we let that go. And I'm just like, yeah, but we're dealing with patterns and we need to bring in the references.
Yeah. I can see how that'd be a problem because I often, I don't like, I have no control over what I remember and what I don't.
Yeah.
But I find I tend to remember what for me feels like the most important thing, even though it's a minute detail.
Yeah.
But if I share it, then it's interpreted very differently from. Yeah.
So I go through that.
So I used to joke and say that, when you're out partying and you're drinking and you do something stupid, even then I would not forget.
Yeah.
But I'd then use, for example, alcohol as an excuse why I did X, Y, Z. And yes, my judgment was impaired.
Yeah.
It was impaired, but I do remember
the recollection.
I do remember what happened. Like, I can't even be like, no, I don't remember. It's like, no, I could tell you the conversation that was had.
Yeah. So it's both a blessing and a curse, right? Remembering, because then you sit with the burden of remembering, of memory, right? Remembering events, remembering what people did to you, but also, I guess, in a sort of larger scale, remembering social events, or constructs like apartheid, and having to work with it now in the archive is also something that I'm sort of trying to deal with, because it does have effects. And we can get into this now or even later, but, trying to sort of like balance that with sort of, I don't know, happy images. And I think this is more also sort of gravitating towards. And maybe when you're talking about like choosing to remember particular things or what was important to you, I couldn't help it. I remember the fluff, the everything. I just like had an information retention capacity that I just didn't know came from where. Like trivia, like, I would just always have like a lot of useless, what people would consider useless information.
Absolutely.
You know, like,
Yeah, I'm with you.
when people always ask, like, why do you know this stuff? And I'm just like, I don't know, like just random trivia about celebrities, and
But it's about, and it's something that I believe in, and I talk to young people about, is this idea of curiosity. I think society often does not see the value in just curiosity. Like, I believe there's a great value, especially in the world the way it is today.
Yeah.
With everything shifting and a lot of us being, those of us who are generalists finally having a place, because it was always a world for specialists.
Yeah.
So just being curious to find stuff out, because all of that enriches whatever experience that you may be having.
Yeah, I'm actually a little worried about, this kind of, the new generation and this information age, and how things are almost always sort of handed down to you. Because I always linked curiosity to, not just linking it. Curiosity, it's like an active seeking out of something, right? And one of the biggest things that I used to do, I used to love reading, and I used to read a lot of books, and some of the books were sort of like, as far as my age and my sort of like level of comprehension was concerned, they were way above my league. I remember trying to read Steve Biko's I Write What I Like, and I think I was, like standard 7, standard 8. But like putting it down, thinking to myself, sheesh, I can't understand like 80% of what this guy is saying, but I'm going to push through anyway. And that happened with a lot of books, actually, where I'd had to revisit them like 3-4 years later, because the first time I read them, they just didn't make any sense to me. But there was always something that would stay with me, whether it was a word or a thought or a phrase that would then, for the next week, would like, send me on a new path of like discovery, whether
Did you grow up in a house of books?
Not really. It's interesting, because there wasn't a lot of reading in my family, but for some reason, it's something that I was, very much into, and from a young age, And I used to go out and buy books. I, luckily found friends who were into books, who would then share books with me a lot. But what I found was that even just the shame of saying a word wrong that you've had in your head for like a year because you read it, but you've never spoken, and now you're saying it for the first time and being corrected when it's, debutante, and you just said debutantes. A word like that. And then walking around, always felt like, I need to do more. I need to do enough of this. And I watch my kids today, and it's just, hey Siri, what's this? What's the score for this? Oh, Siri's trying to respond. Let me switch off my phone. And so now I see that the value of curiosity is almost diminished, because now it's almost like you don't have to do that work of like seeking out knowledge, because it's always there.
I think the problem also is the assumption that what you're being fed is, I don't know, like right or moral or true or whatever it is. For me, that's the kind of greater risk. It's like, stuff is put on a platter, but you don't have to scratch. You don't have to scratch that far beneath the surface to realize that, wait a minute, like there's a bias in here, or it's actually just wrong.
If you're discerning.
Yeah. And so that's where my concern often is. And having worked in the media, for example, like I always tell people, it's like, just ask 1 or 2 questions. You don't have to go too far.
Okay.
I'm a football fan. Transfer season. Like, I hate transfer season because I'm part of groups, and then everybody's always theorizing and oh, this player's coming to this club. And then it goes on for 2 weeks. And the fans are all having the discussion. Then the player doesn't go to the club. And I'm like, but show me where the club actually said we are talking to this person. It's blogs, websites, etc. that highlighted it and then drew the conversation out for 2-3 weeks. I'm like, I work in telling stories. What you want is something that's going to hook people and keep them coming back to your space. So that's how I'll engage with that. Whereas I look at everybody else around me and, running conversations, because Lebang Rastaba and I support the same team and we're in the same groups. And he started with Kojo-isms. Because I'm like, I will tell you the players come into the club when I see the person on the field.
Yeah.
Until then, don't tell me the speculation, don't tell me the stories. So from, I guess, my point of, to a certain extent, privilege, I kind of go, it's not actually that much work to just scratch a little bit and determine.
Yeah.
I used to say to my kids when they were younger, they'll tell me they Google something. And I'd say, well, what website did the information come from?
Uh-huh.
So you Google something.
Is this the Wikipedia argument?
Well, not even Wikipedia. Like okay. Wikipedia, I use Wikipedia. I'll use Wikipedia. I'll certain things I'll check further, but I understand its biases. I understand its inadequacies, but it's a very useful tool for me when I'm writing or researching, etc. Right? So it's not even that, but it's just you got a snake that flies. And did you see it on a random blog, or was it on National Geographic?
Yeah.
I'm like, if it's on National Geographic, I'm more inclined to believe.
For sure.
Than if it's on some random person's blog. Or if it's on a random person's blog, have you gone through their blog to see kind of the level of trust that they've built with what they're putting out?
Yeah.
And for me, that's the greater, I feel like that's the greater risk. There's information out, there's a lot of information out. And like you're saying, I mean, these generations are being spoon-fed information, but they're not learning how to be discerning enough to go, let me just go as 2 steps further.
Yeah.
Than just here's information, this is fact.
I have a new maxim and a new way of navigating the world as far as knowledge and information is concerned. And I tell myself from the beginning that everything is propaganda. And this is how I enter different spaces. And I think that, and this is the great thing with archives, right? Is that let's take South Africa, for example. You have colonial archives, which for the most part are racist and, sort of driving a particular agenda. And especially this was a time of eugenics studies and, being formed in Western Europe and, but it's also we've got to do everything that has to do with the colonial project, which is, about dispossession and especially of land and, mineral resources and that kind of thing. And then you have apartheid archives, which are also quite specific. I mean, they do pretty much the same work, but they're kind of more political and ideological. It's not just base level anthropology or, and then you have liberation struggle archives, right? The ANC and the PAC wage an armed struggle. People go into exile, people go to prison, and you realize that a lot of the films that were made during that time were also made from a particular lens or with a particular goal in mind. So when you're making documentaries about apartheid, about South Africa, about dispossession in 2024, the rules are different to when you would have made it in 1987 or 86, or let's say 86 during the state of emergency, or say 76. We really wanted to communicate a strong image of how oppressive apartheid and suppressive apartheid was, right? So showing dead bodies on the ground was commonplace, or black dead bodies on the ground, or dead black bodies on the ground was commonplace because we were saying, hey, look at what they're doing to us, right? So there was no nuance required from that. So you could tell the story of, the wars and how we arrived at that place since, 1652, and literally just keep showing these images of our subjugation, of, how, you could just be delve into complete victimhood. And no one would ask questions, right? We wanted the world to divest, to boycott, and we had a clear particular message with a clear, common enemy. And so now the filmmakers of my generation and telling stories about South Africa have a different challenge. And it's mainly sort of like philosophical, and it's just really these questions about like representation. Like, people will tell you it's out of apartheid stories. We don't see any more dead people, and so you have to be more nuanced. You kind of have to hide the maybe not hide the facts, but sort of find a way to distill the truth and the facts in a more palatable way. And so for me, even the archive is not static, as much as it sits in shelves in universities or agencies and broadcasters. It's still whoever's playing with the archives will always come in with a particular, sort of like frame to which to use the archive. And so you watch the archive and then you realize that, we were doing this. I mean, it was for a noble cause, and I, sort of align with the reasons why we made films in this way, because like I said, we're trying to get the word to divest. But tonally, there's not much in terms of its level of sentimentality, or the delivery. There's a thing about propaganda that almost exaggerates certain things, and you'll find it everywhere. You'll find it with, like, say, films about the Russian Revolution that someone like Eisenstein made, or who's the guy who made three songs about Lenin, and they were reinventing cinema. These Russian filmmakers, but all they were making was propaganda films, and documentary comes from, if not anthropological films, like propaganda films. And so you look at that, and you look at, say, the South African films, and then you look at what's happening with, say, the Trump campaign, for example, in 2020 or in 2024, you realize there's a certain tonality to propaganda. This, look at me, listen to my story. I'm the victim here. My story is valid, and this is how victorious I can be, or will be, or we have been, and for me, it's also just always trying to navigate the gray spaces. So even the things that I subscribe to and sort of completely believe in, and I always try and sort of, it's the gray space for me. It's like, how do I enter into this thing as much as I fully agree with it and endorse it? But where are the blind spots in my, in my engagement with it? Because I think that the polarities and the divisions come about because of, people not asking enough questions, people not poking after their own convictions, at their own beliefs, at whatever it is that they subscribe to. And this is why I have a problem with religion.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. I delve into their journeys, the decisions they've taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the conversation takes us.
How did you enter the space? I mean, you're a filmmaker, but I mean, you're a filmmaker in terms of, when I worked for an actors agency, and they always say you need a triple threat, sing, act, dance. You produce, direct, write. I mean, basically, you're self-contained. To a certain extent, you're a self-contained unit.
I am.
How did you come to be a filmmaker and an archive researcher? Like, first of all, archive researcher, the first time I heard that as a title was with you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. So how, growing up, you're curious, you read books, you're just interested in different things. You geek out, you nerd out on different things. And then, when we first met, we were both working for television.
Yeah.
On a men's show, of all things, which had its own dramas and its own stories. But yeah, I'm trying to get a sense of that kind of trajectory from, okay, this is who I am, to, oh, this is what I'm going to do with my life.
Okay. I think it's story time again. I'll try and be very quick.
It's a podcast, Chief. Like, there's no...
Okay, cool. Awesome.
There's nobody saying,
we have to go to the commercial break.
Yeah.
So in 2004, 2005, it was 2005, I left the band I started. It was a band called the Blackjacks.
Which I never knew. I never knew you started it. I never knew you involved.
It's a crazy story. Just hear me out. I started the band with childhood friends, Mpumi and Linda. We've known each other since like age 10, growing up in Sprayview. When I arrived in Sprayview, they were there in 1990. And we, just started hitting it off. We played basketball. We're all rapping. At some point, I got into alternative music, but it was like, when you're like that lone kid in the hood who, wears black and listens to grunge and like Smashing Pumpkins and, all those bands. And for some reason, I convinced Mpumi and Linda that this was the shit, okay, the time for Mobb Deep is over. Like, let's jump into this new thing. And and we were finding the music everywhere. Part of the story, which I want to actually include in the film one day, is how some of our brothers were thugs, and they'd go and steal cars, and some of the cars they were stealing, they'd find CDs, and some of those CDs would be Pearl Jam, and and I literally have an image of my friend Teppo's brother coming to my bedroom and just throwing the CDs out. I was like, yeah, guys, take this, see what you do with it,
kind of thing.
Yeah. And so, kind of it evolves very quickly from just like radio-friendly rock, stadium rock or pop rock, to like, Massive Attack and Bjork and Tricky, and, at the time it was still kind of like the trip-hop phase. But eventually started a band. We're all sharing one guitar, but it was kind of like growing, right? I'm the first one, or the only one at the time who had a job. So I'm like buying guitars on HQ for the guys, buy myself a bass. I was working at a call center for MultiChoice for a while, actually. And I used to just watch while waiting for calls to come into my earpiece. Just try and change it's quick. I'd get there early so I can change the channel to MTV because I wanted to see the rock videos. I was quite obsessed, and so buy guitars for the gents. I move out. We have rehearsal space, and then we started having ideological differences as far as like which direction the music should move into. I was frustrated. I quit my job. And I moved back home, and my mom was like, I don't want these guitars in my house because you dropped out. I was doing a computer sciences degree, BSc, that I dropped out at second year. So she was still upset about that. So she didn't want guitars at our house or anything to do with rock music because also satanism, that label. And so I kind of like felt displaced. I'm not band, it doesn't really want me anymore. I'm not wanted at home. And I just put a stop to everything while we're having all these difficulties. And I could just feel that they were kind of like throwing me out, like you find out that there were sessions without me and all that stuff. So I quit. I quit the job. So I quit the job and the band and just said to my mom, look, I'm going to sort myself out and I'm going to move move out of home, I used to go to the Sprayview Library a lot. I couldn't really afford to buy the Mail and Guardian every Friday, so I used to read it at the library. I went one day and there was an advert for a learnership at Monash University, which then became Big Fish School of Digital Filmmaking. But they were housed by Monash University and they were running this learnership program funded by the CETAs or whatever. And it was like this 1 year course of like just, in class studying and then like on the job training.
Mm.
So, that's how I get into film. Leading up to that, because I was so invested in like this music thing, I used to watch a lot of alternative films to find great music. So I think there was also a just language developed around film and filmmaking and an interest for me because, someone would be like, oh, have you seen Run Lola Run? Oh, the soundtrack is amazing. Or, and there wasn't always alternative films. It was also like, what's his name? The film with Coolio and what's his name? Remember High School something? Or Gangster's Paradise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And,
So Michelle Pfeiffer. Yeah.
That was such a great film. That's why I closed my eyes and I saw her and I was like, there's the name.
Yeah. So there was always that period where we were all just chasing music, but in films, because, and then, you'd find that they'd have the stuff that you like, which is, some mainstream hip hop, but then it's also like always an extension, some other sort of like tones and like musical forms. And so I kind of already invested in this thing, but from like a consumption or consumer point of view, and now I'm sort of going into it as someone who's a practitioner. And yeah, and I guess the rest is history, did that course where they got some of the best people in the industry to lecture us, Rihat Desai, Vuyani Sondlo, sure, Yoav Dogan, who was doing sound, and they would show us the most incredible films, from all over the world, And so this kind of like deepened my love for films. But even before then, there was a point where we were making train surfer films. So me and Bumi from the Blackjacks and another Bumi, Bumi Mbele, who actually recently did the film on Ladysmith Black Mambazo, and I think he won a couple of awards, had, again, uncles and older brothers who used to hijack cars and trucks and would come home
CDs
and say,
cameras.
Here's a camera. So in 2004, I had a DVS, those mini DV tapes camera. Even before then, it was was it High 8? Yeah, the High 8 cameras. So I used to go around Joburg filming a lot of events. But this wasn't with a filmmaker title or, like intention or intentionality in mind. It was just like, oh, I've got this cool thing, a camera, and I'm going around, just like filming people. This is how I actually build my archive. And there's other guys in Sprayview who are doing the same thing. And, we just going around filming events. And sometimes it was a way to get into gigs for free at Horror Cafe. When Loction Culture was doing their promo events, we'd go there with our cameras and, we'd be able to score tickets. I didn't tell you about that, but this is pre-Big Fish, Monash days. And so, so just coming out of Monash, there's like this legitimacy now, right? There's this thing that says you can do this thing. As part of the program, I make my first short film. It was about 5 minutes, a film on train surfing, and it was called Spider-Man and Romeo. Gets into film festivals. Just the world just becomes so much bigger. I'm now being flown to Cape Town to present my film at festivals. I'm in Durban, and it's just like, whoa! I'm now sort of like entered the amazing world of filmmaking. And then from there, it's just really, sort of also trying to pay the bills. So you're just working in different jobs. This with the ambition to direct. A single-minded, like I want to direct. At the time, there's not a lot of opportunities for young Black directors. And there's television, there's advertising. I think only a few people were touching cinema back then. And they kind of felt like the chosen few. And they had labels like Mavericks, Dewo Mahlatsi, Kalo Matabane, Dumsani Pagati. There was like literally Zola Masego, there were like 5 Black filmmakers that we all looked up to. They were just like these young Black guys most of them from the hood. And they were doing this thing called filmmaking, and they were directors, right? And an extension of that was directing commercials. And documentaries weren't even all that popular back then, And so, or, you can score a gig directing television, but even that, people didn't know how. And the frustration of not being, because I think the barriers to entry were so high, or it was just either a boys' club or this other club or that club, I realized that my ambition for directing is not going to be realized anytime soon. So I started making music videos and like short projects. I made a music video for Mbande Core, band from Vosloorus in the East Rand that was quite popular. Dumi, Stogie T saw that, and he was like, yo, I want you to make me a video. So then I make Bambezela, which is Dumi featuring Bricks in 2010.
I think we had a conversation about that at dinner.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. And it was such a fascinating time for me, because now I could like wear this title of director, because, I've done independent projects. I mean, a couple of music videos and, a couple of shorts, like, I don't know, documentaries, but it was starting to become real. Yeah, I mean, the Dumi music video is a story on its own, and it's fascinating. And I think we discussed some of the behind-the-scenes events with Bricks not remembering his lyrics on the day of the shoot. But then I'd go back and knock on a lot of doors and realize that it's not happening. Even, my show reel wasn't strong enough. People just went biting. At this point, I'm trying to get into like directing commercials, and it's not happening. I think maybe hate is a strong word, but I hated the advertising industry since that day. Since those days, if you ask me today, it would take a lot for me to, direct a commercial. I kind of saw that role from a different lens, and the more and more I kind of had access to it, the more I realized that actually it's not really my thing. And my thing is about like real stories and, documentaries. That's why I love documentaries, because, you kind of like deal with like reality to a certain extent, And I think there isn't as much of a hierarchy as you have like in the advertising world, and that, you still have like a lot of control over your ideas.
How does that, and I think you kind of touched on it earlier on, in focusing on documentary, and I say this with love because I've been accused of it myself, is, you work in documentary and you come across as quite serious.
Yeah.
Right? How do you find the balance in, let's say, your head, your heart, in your being? Because when you focus on certain areas, it does have an impact on your energy, your mind state, etc. Do you find a balance? What are the things that you do to kind of counterbalance being so submerged in the serious, the important, the intense, the difficult?
Yeah. It's so funny, because that's not something I thought about until a friend of mine, Ponko Monde, on Instagram, because I started doing this thing where I'm just sharing all these archives on my Instagram page, and it just became a way in which to not really curate. I mean, at the time, it wasn't with the intention of like, oh, I'm going to turn my page into an archive page, and then it's going to have like, make some curatorial efforts to, to speak about this thing. It was really just putting them out. And she sent me an inbox, and I just released A New Country, which is my second feature film, which at the time was about 25 years of democracy. And I don't know if you saw it, but it had like...
I didn't get a chance to see it.
Bev Diti, Pew and Pierre, Advocate Tembega Ngaidobi. And I mean, when you ask people to come talk about a democracy, to reflect on, our democracy, whether 30 years now, or, when 5 years ago, when it was 25 years. I mean, the first thing I think for a lot of people that comes up is the inequality and the injustice. And at the time, in 2018, which has been labeled the most unequal society in the world by Times Magazine. So there was that, and I was putting it out. I'm proud, I'm happy, and some of the archives that were in the film, I'm putting out on my Instagram page. And she was like, "Hey, friend, I've always wanted to ask you this. How do you always deal with like these heavy themes, with these difficult themes? How do you, sort of, to create a space for yourself to just, get through this, to go to therapy and you go?" And I was like, "Oh, snap."
And then Paul would be the person to ask that. I also get the direct messages sometimes.
Yeah. And I was like, "Oh, shit. I haven't actually thought about this and how it's affected me." And since then, I've started paying attention. And I realized that there's a lot of weight that I carry from interacting with these images. I mean, some of them is things that I've seen before. There's a lot of images that I see in the archive when, doing research for documentaries, even for other people's documentaries, that I wouldn't dare show to a friend on a inbox, let alone put out on social media because of just like how gory they are, And I was like, okay, cool. So there's ways to think about this. There's not a lot of archive researchers. I'm getting a lot of archive research work. The ones that I know all want to just move on to other things, maybe for the same reasons. But I literally know other 4 archive researchers apart from me. And so I'm getting a lot of calls, but now this means that I have to spend a lot more time in the archive. And then I think for the first time, about 2 years ago, maybe 2022, 2 years ago, I realized that I probably don't have that much time doing this work, especially for other people, because it just kind of rehashes like the same, hurt, and I haven't even figured out a system of how to deal with it. Or maybe I should sort of build into the budget therapy, for having dealt with these images, because there is an impact. I'm not sure in what ways there's, it's always within like a safe space, working from home in the evening when everyone's asleep. And I'll probably go to bed right after, and the images will stay with me, but they'll dissipate. I've seen a lot. It's like, being a doctor and seeing casualties.
But one could also argue that it dissipates, but it still leaves residues.
It does.
That will build up.
What I start to see a lot more of is just my impatience, especially when it comes to race relations in this country. So in WhatsApp groups, when, older white men, older white women complains about, stuff that, affects all of us, but try and exceptionalizes their position or criminalizes a black position to be like, the thing I was talking about, there's a black man walking down the street and it happens all the time. And then, if, we see white men walking down the street, they don't get profiled, or, we talk about the ways in which we talk about our government's inadequacies. And there's a particular lens. People don't have to be overtly racist, but there's always something, that says all of you, you're included as much as you're part of this community and you're paying as much as we all do, but you're part of the failure kind of thing. And I find myself always just like ready to jump, just on the defensive. Because for me, that's the thing, right? The part of the archive work is not necessarily about history or about the past. It's always a reminder of the society that you're living in now and how and why things are the way they are structurally, because of, how they were set up before. I saw it even today, the conversations around like rugby and, the cleaning up of the stadium and the surrounding areas, and how that doesn't happen on, under normal circumstances, but because of this. And I see the sort of the polarized way in which we have this conversation, and we continue to have this conversation from like a very, I guess, again, polarized, from polarized positions as South Africans. And so I find that I very quick to be defensive and maybe even, I wouldn't say judgmental, but just to be like, you're speaking from a privileged position and you're, it's not enough that we tackle this thing from just this one place that seeks to delegitimize or discredit. I don't know who we're talking about in that moment, the Sufi or whichever, And so for me, it's always like, it's just questions around how do we have questions about, or conversations about South Africa that always take all our bullshit into context. It's not just about like, oh, but you've had the 30 years. Oh, but you've had this much in budget. Oh, but you've had this. Take everything, take the fact that, because we don't own the land, we can't build, key institutions even. There's places in the country where they can't build public hospitals because the owners of the land won't sell, and the owners of the land are in Germany, in Berlin, and the government couldn't build a freight speed train from KZN ports to Pretoria or Johannesburg because the 22 landowners between the two cities were either charging ridiculous amounts of money for the land to build that train, or they said no. This is not history. A government cannot build you a train in a hospital because people won't give them land to, or won't sell them land to do that. And yeah, so there's a particular frame in which we think and speak about injustice that doesn't always take the full image. And when we deal with the archives, you're always reminded of, our founding story and, how everything started and how it was maintained throughout. And I guess with the 1994 project, you almost have to keep your mouth shut about a lot of things because otherwise your views are radical and they're anti-democracy or, but you kind of constantly have to do this meditation of like, how do I apply myself in this conversation? Do I, bring the ruckus?
How does this translate into how you parent? Because you're carrying all of this, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's ruckus, whether it's depending on what one's kind of viewpoint of the lens.
Yeah.
And now you have children.
Oh yeah.
In this space, you have a more nuanced and detailed understanding of, like you're saying, history, institution, system, and how today operates the way it does because of all these things, not just what's happening today. And you come from also a particular generation in terms of, the transition from, pre to post 1994, which had its challenges. And, to a certain extent, I've heard you talk about it being the guinea pigs. And now you have children you are raising within the same environment and understanding all of these things, and also understanding that children do not come with a manual.
Yeah.
And you can have they are going to experience the world in their own way, and you have an element of influence over how they'll perceive the world, but they'll also go out and get experiences and get perspectives that sometimes can be in total contradiction to yours because of their experience.
Yeah, it's so, especially being a parent, it was really just about, I had what I'd consider an existential crisis when I had my second born. And I always joke about this and say that my first child, Nkanyezi, felt like an accessory. Like, we had a child. We have a child. There's a separation, right? It's not like an identity thing. Whereas when Leroy was born, I was like, oh shit, you're a dad. The father title is your identity,
Yeah.
right? And so then it becomes about how this is for life. How do you maintain this with everything that you know? everything that you've known up until this point has to be assessed, analyzed. You can't use your parenting methods. My parents used to shout all the time, and it was traumatizing. How do I negate that now? What tools do I have to not shout at my kids? These things have to be learned on the spot, right? How do we talk about gender issues? How do I talk about race issues with my kids? I just had like a flash, just an avalanche of like questions that literally crippled me. Usually I'd just go outside and smoke because I just didn't know how to confront these questions. And I think that I don't think you arrive, it's something that you arrive at. I think that it's just like a constant refining. Yeah, because there are things that also make you hypocritical, right? Where you might want to take your kids to particular schools that you, in the greater scheme of things, don't agree with the structure of where those things sit.
Yeah.
Because they're part of like the deepening of the divide in resources, in quality of it, in choosing who, gets the opportunities, you know? So whether it's sports, and I think we're going to start seeing it now, like even with soccer, we're going to start seeing, kids from more privileged schools be the ones. I mean, we used to joke about soccer players and I mean, maybe not all of us, but the whole soccer player thing in English and and there was like a running thing for a while. And then,
I mean, any of us who've ever had to interview an old soccer player,
it was a real thing.
Tended to be difficult because also we're doing it in spaces where it was dictated how it must be presented. Right?
Yes, and I mean, it had to be in English. And I think that now we're kind of starting to see, or we'll start seeing that divide. But you also saying, look, I don't want my kids to be left behind. So I'm gonna do the best that I can, and then to afford those schools means that you have to work 3 times harder, or maybe even consider opportunities that you wouldn't. I might have to go into advertising, or start a KFC franchise. The socialist, anti-capitalist, title sort of immediately falls away. And I think that's, for me, the complexity of South Africa is that you don't have a lot of choices. And as far as like things of importance are concerned, you can talk the talk, but the talk is, I mean, the test is really if you kind of really willing to fall within your sort of like ideological boundaries. And so you try and then loosen up and say, look, I'm going to be curious and see where this takes me. Something I'm not proud of. I'm not sure if I'm really ashamed of, but my kids don't speak isiZulu. I come from like a proud Zulu family that's, sort of passed this down to me. My sort of grasp of the language is really great, but for some reason, I mean, we speak English at home with my wife, and I haven't passed it on to my kids. And Kanye's 7, little was 4. So then that becomes a thing, and then at some point
that's a conversation
yourself,
a lot of us have had.
And
I always tell the story of judging my older sister, because my older sister's a couple of years older than I am. I mean, there's 11 years between us.
Sure.
So I mean, my oldest nephew's in his 30s. And my brother-in-law's from Venda. And I remember when they were growing up and I'd go to the house and I'm like, why aren't they learning, whether it's Chivenda, whether it's Ghanaian languages, whether it's Sotho, but why aren't they learning a language? And I always say I was very vocal about this. And then I had children and then I understood. It's not good. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. I just understood how difficult it actually is. And on paper, it sounds great. Like they tell you kind of multilingual, this and that.
The development of the brain.
One parent must speak one language, the other parent must speak the other language. And then you're living it and you're trying to deal with everything.
It's not happening.
And
it's so difficult. But I mean, I think the questions are the same for everything. And when your 7-year-old comes back home and says, "Oh, Daddy, you know that boys are better than girls, and we beat girls at this game of soccer," and you have to find the language for a 7-year-old to let him know that that's not true, to a great extent. And it's not easy because it gets reinforced on a daily basis, right? He goes back to school and he, comes back, yes, but, and then you have to continue doing the work. And for me, it's what I do now is not necessarily thinking about the intersections now, but thinking about what world is being created for my sons.
Mm-hmm.
As things stand right now, with our politics, with, economics, what do I think South Africa will look like in 20 years, in 25 years? Where would I want to, or the world even, where do I want to position my boys within that world? So a lot of it is letting go, which I said in the beginning. I don't get into as much, road rage incidents with belligerent white men anymore because, I have a 4-year-old in the backseat. It's like there's a lot of things that you can shed off in your anger, in your what you consider injustice, that and I think there's I realize also now the importance of South African exceptionalism, as much as I don't agree with it, because I think it also leads to ideas of phobia, xenophobia, but that idea that we're a special nation and we find opportunities to get that. I'm starting to buy into things like that, just out of necessity. Like, I'm not really, I don't care about rugby, but my son is ecstatic that South Africa is playing New Zealand, and we're going to go to a friend's house and we're going to watch it, and he's going to carry his flag, and I'm going to participate in that dream completely and fully immerse myself in it because I have nothing to lose, right? So it's also just really just constantly negotiating the space you occupy in your head and like the lived reality to be like, what? Yeah, I can walk around with like these, sort of Pan-Africanist, maybe even Bikoist ideas of what South Africa should be, or, Azania, whatever. But it's and I can work towards that, but I'm not going to accomplish that alone. And so the reality is this is the image we have of South Africa in 20 years. And I can't disenfranchise my kids from that. I don't want to isolate them. I will have clear conversations about how we arrived here, but I also want them to use that as a tool they'll whip up when necessary. But it's not something they should walk around with. I don't think they should, sort of inherit our hang-ups.
Yeah, absolutely.
About what this place is. We had a big argument with my wife, and Khanyile comes home, starts singing the South African anthem, sings these stems, and she's like, "We don't sing that here." And I'm like, "No, we do." Until the point where he gets why I think this was 2 years ago, so he was still 5, turning 6. I was like, until the point we have to buy into this dream. That was the pact, that we'll buy into it until the point where he can make sense of it himself. But we shouldn't rob him of that experience. I don't think that at 6 years old or 5 years old, you sort of have him work against his environment.
You are listening to the Listen to Your Footsteps podcast, a podcast in which I chat to Africans from a cross-section of society and sectors, including art, culture, design, business, and creativity, to name a few. I delve into their journeys, the decisions they've taken to get to where they are, how they do what they do, and everything in between. Essentially, we go wherever the conversation takes us.
Yeah, so it's not easy.
I've had a couple of those, and also kind of let's call it fumbling my way through, like we do with most things with our kids.
Yeah,
we won't get into religion, but for example, I do not follow any organized religion, and I never have.
Yeah, that's me.
But I have a lot of respect for and have people who worship in different ways. And I have no judgment over how they worship, including within my own family. right?
Yeah.
And I grew up in a family where, my older sister is a Christian and, involved in the church and really involved. But I grew up in a household where you went the route that made sense for you. And then losing my mother-in-law passing away and seeing how Christianity provided my wife and my son with comfort.
Yeah.
And going, this is not a place for me to go, yeah, but think about all of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's giving them comfort, is enabling them to grieve and live with the void that is left by somebody who transitions. I have my own way of dealing with it, but if this is working for them, it's not my place to kind of go, yeah, but let's have a discussion about it.
For sure.
Right?
No, definitely.
And allowing them that space. So if we have people over for dinner, like we had a Christmas dinner with 1 or 2 friends, and everybody prays, and I don't pray, but I keep quiet out of respect for others. And I have Muslim friends and I have Jewish friends, etc. So it's that navigating your viewpoint. Like right now, I am boycotting quite a few brands, right? And my family is not. Like,
yeah.
Like my son who is 17 now, he's like, yeah, but it doesn't work. Like, what impact are you gonna make?
Yeah.
And I said to him, do you know what? I feel better about myself. I'm not thinking about whether it's going to change anything. All I'm thinking about in terms of my values and how your grandfather raised me, do I feel that this is important for me?
Yeah.
And I don't have to tell everybody, I don't have to tell the world that I'm doing it. It's just the thing that I'm doing for my peace of mind in line with my values. And I'm also not going to sit and insist. I've had the conversation. The family knows why I'm doing it, but they don't feel it's important to them. Shut. Like, and this is my cliched line is that if we allow them, our children allow us to become better versions of ourselves.
Yeah.
To become better human beings.
Yeah.
And so that I try to use the journey for that now. It's like sometimes I just have being able to articulate why I'm going this route.
No, for sure.
Very simply that.
Yeah, I mean, religion is a good example. I mean, my kids go to a Catholic school, and so I also, identify as agnostic existentialist because I kind of don't want to embrace the atheist title fully because there's parts of me that want to connect with sort of my people in spirit, like in the ancestral realm. But I interpret that as science more than I do as like religion or even spirituality. But that's a conversation for another day. But yeah, when you look at these influences, but you also realize their value, right, as organizing forces. And maybe the example that you use with your family grieving and finding Christ or Christianity as the vehicle which to express that grief, valid for them. But even as if you look at, liberation struggles throughout the world, I mean, in the States mainly, as South Africa almost equally, just using religion as an organizing force to rally people around an idea, right? Whether to resist or to sort of march towards something. And then I don't know how many years down the line from that struggle, want to sit there and tell your son that this thing is nonsense.
Yeah.
It's those questions. Then how much value am I putting here in that moment? Because I guess what you said about fumbling through it is that the questions will come at unexpected times, or maybe not the questions, but the expressions, the singing of the stem in a house where the stem is not supposed to be sung. And then deciding what to do about it in that moment with a 6-year-old. Like, do I want to have the lecture? And then maybe that starts different things. And because, also kids, or, young people in general are sponges, they absorb quite a lot. And we did the thing of conscientizing our son with, the Middle East, genocide. And we were very clear. We, took him to marches at the, different sort of sites, got the flags, did the whole thing. And because he's so inquisitive, he'd start asking questions. And there were some resistance at school as well, with some kids, some teachers. October 7th seems to be a big thing and justifying, the genocide. No questions about what happened before. And so in doing this work, I had to stop myself somewhere along the line and say, you know what, actually, he's 7 years old. I'm not deliberately trying to raise you know what I mean? If I get my act together and my health is intact, I can have these conversations with him at some other stage, or I can curate or maybe control how I have the conversation with him now so that it just, it doesn't get overbearing at some point, and it, again, doesn't isolate him in the spaces that he wants to impress people and navigate. And so it becomes difficult then to sort of like fight these like big notions about country, about God, about community, about, and I guess the great thing about being agnostic is that you don't even care that much about your own position most of the time, right? And so you don't have this dogmatic
like you need to go
towards,
you need to go this particular route.
It's always negotiable. It's always we can always, I guess, negotiable. You can. So for me, that's kind of like a place that's easier to operate from. And whereas I know my struggles in my family with what you described, and still today, I feel like, coming out as atheist, 12 years ago, it's almost like being in the closet, like coming out as gay almost, it's like unspeakable. What do you mean? There's no God, or we don't have an interventionist God. God bought me this Mercedes Benz or this house. What are you talking about? Of course he hears my cries. And so then, and you watch those people raise their kids who are in the same generation as you, who grew up with you, who love you, who you love back equally, go in a particular direction and become quite dogmatic and, sort of like, it's either Christ or nothing at all. To their kids who are the same generation as your kids, who, almost the same age, who play with your kids. And thinking around, potential contestations there. And what it means to then sort of, I guess, hold each other with like grace and empathy, even with these like ideological or, big ideological differences. Like how do I just teach my son to be kinder, to be more empathetic, to be, there's only a few in the spectrum of values, like, only a few things I think that could be a real legacy for me, for him. It's not necessarily particular ideas, but the way in which to conduct himself and operate in the world, because I think what we're seeing now, again, sorry, just to reference some of the world events, conversations that we always have with our friends, it's just like the rise in the right and how sophisticated the right has been, especially sort of like the right American conservatives, right? So, your anti-trans, your anti, what is it with the education? So anti-trans, anti-abortion, anti-critical, was it? Race theory, critical race theory, right? And you find that it's the same network of people who are getting a lot of attention these days. Some more smarter than others, so they're a bit more nuanced, so they're not avert in certain ideas. People like Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, Andrew Tate. But this idea of being a man, all of a sudden, is coming back and is coming into sort of like mainstream, but like in the sort of classical sense, as the provider, the protector, the, biological male, all of these things, right? And the dangers in that, because you have people who are your generations who are falling for it, right? And maybe they need something from it. Maybe it's of value for you to see yourself as the man's man, or, kind of see yourself in that light. But for our kids, what does it mean? And you get that, okay, it's a response because maybe sort of in the last 10, 15 years, third wave feminism had sort of like grown in influence and did a lot of groundwork. And now, the people who feel threatened. But for me, it's liberation work, we're not free until everyone is free. And so if there's going to be like responses to that kind of work, and the responses are about us consolidating again, or railing around the idea of just like being like a man, that's just not good enough. And this is not something that I want to teach my kids, And so I see kind of like the different dangers and like what's attractive. Now, most of those conversations also sort of like link in money and prosperity and success. So, you'll see the cars they're driving. They'll tell you about Bill Gates and Elon Musk and what they did, and family structures and all of these things. And so you get to a place where the proliferation of I don't want to say fake news as such, but like propaganda is like at an all-time high, and it doesn't even matter anymore like what it is that we're speaking about. Everything, there's a sensationalist element or angle to how we talk about our convictions and the things that we believe in. That is almost inconceivable to just be chilled out, just to be not blasé about things, but just to not be waging some kind of like crusade right now. It's like,
so what I try to do, and I often like, I wonder if it's enough, if it'll be enough. I wonder whether it's even worth the effort, is as an individual, particularly within my family and my community. So not kind of broader than in terms of broader society, but as a starting point, just within my unit with my children, is to serve as a counterbalance for all of those ideas. All the ideas of, what a man is supposed to be. Or what success is, or how we must work, how we must live. And I'm very flawed, I still am. But consciously and unconsciously, I try to live my life as a counterbalance for my family to see something different and it be immediate. And like I said, it's something that I'll question sometimes, but it's also where I am in my journey, and finding that it's harder to make, it's harder to make the decision, let me do this because I need to do this to provide for. And rather go, because I always say, I'm trying to build a life, not a career.
Yeah.
And so I try to do that. And my daughter's exclaimed once or twice about, I'd ask her, okay, what do you want to do? And she's 13 now. And at some stage, she wanted to be a vet when she was young, and then, interior designer. And then one day she was like, maybe a marine biologist, right? And she loves animals and she loves nature, and she always has. Oh, but maybe not, because I probably wouldn't make enough money, because I want to buy this type of car and this, and having this conversation with her, saying, you can be that and get to that position, because you don't, to buy the car that you want, you do not have to be rich.
Yeah.
There's a way of building, and she was 12 or she was 11 then. Like, I can't explain how you can craft life.
Yeah.
How you can craft your day to day to be able to achieve some of those material things without being extremely wealthy.
Yeah.
Because I'm still trying to figure it out and mold it. But it's this idea of trying to serve as a counterbalance.
Yeah.
Because, at some stage with Andrew Tate, I told my son, like, you don't watch that. Like,
yeah.
you don't. He was, one of his friends came to the house and had it like on YouTube, on TV. And I was just like, that's totally out of line with my values.
Yeah.
And so on this thing, yeah,
There's no
foot down.
negotiations. Yeah.
You do not watch that.
It's tricky. And I think because success, prosperities is linked to these images, right?
Mm.
And the interesting thing about listening to you speaking out to your daughter about what success is and, you know, creating wealth outside of the things that she's doing is, so one thing that I fought for the longest time in my life is I always considered myself an artist, artist philosopher. But the idea of work and labor for me was, I started rejecting it after realizing after a few jobs that actually I'm not going to create, it doesn't look like I'm going to create my wealth here. And so I started going against the ideas of like, oh, you have to wake up very early to, in order to be successful. I know myself. I do a lot of the most work, or the most productive I can be, is when I'm thinking and when I'm writing. Actually, writing is secondary, thinking first, when I'm just sitting and thinking. That generally happens when everyone's gone to bed at midnight, early hours of the morning, right? So I'll sleep at 2 a.m. on average. And so on average, I wake up at 7. The guys are getting ready to go to school. Mommy has to drop them off and daddy will pick them up because, daddy struggled to wake up. And I grew up in a home where waking up late was like shameful. It was like, what? 8:30, you're still in bed, it was like a thing. So, you kind of like grow up with this thing and you carry it with you and you pass it over, early to bed and early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. And then you realize that maybe it doesn't work for me. I've always been an insomniac. So even when I'm not being productive, I just struggle to sleep. And so then I realized that, hey, I need to be comfortable with this thing of waking up at 7 or 8. The sooner I accept it, the better. And the shame around my sons coming to the room to say, good morning, mommy, good morning, daddy, and daddy's still asleep, shouldn't be a thing. Because now this is falling in line with, with a very set idea of how success is created, how, wealth is created, or your prosperity, right? And it was also sort of like linked to your labor, and the outputs of your labor. And I'm not sure if this is where, I want them to understand the value of hard work, but, it shouldn't be like set ideas of how that hard work is tackled.
Because all along it's been one idea.
Yeah.
It's, you either do it this way or you're a lout or a vagabond or there's the shame, you're lazy, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It's like there's only one way to work. And if you don't fit in within this, then you're actually not working.
Yeah.
So I had a situation with my daughter some years back. I think she was, I can't remember how old she was. Must have been like maybe 6 or 7. And I'm telling her and her brother that I may need to get a job because, I left magazine. She was 2 and I started working from home. So from the age of 2, I've always dropped them at school, but I'm there in the afternoon. When they come home from school, I'm there. I'm picking them up. I'm at sports practice. I'm there in the evening. I'm there in the weekend.
Real privileges.
And I've always had my desk, whether it's next to the dining room, but that's my office.
But they had access to you all this time.
But also they see me there.
Yeah.
I wake up in the morning, I take them to school, and then I go. When they're on holiday, they see me. I go and I have my coffee and I sit at my desk. And so I say to her, I may need to get a job. And she's like, what's a job? I'm like, I need to get work. Yeah. She's like, but you work.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm like, no, like I may need to go to a office And at the time, my wife had been consulting for a business school. So I was like, you know how mommy for the last year, in the morning, she wakes up and she leaves and she goes to the office. And then in the evening, she comes home. She's like, yeah, I don't get it because you work, but cool.
Yeah.
And I took that as a positive because I want my children to understand that there's different ways of showing up in the world.
Yeah.
And work is a part of your life. It's not your whole life.
Yeah.
It should never be all consuming.
Yeah.
Which has been, and I was raised by a workaholic. So it took me years just to not working in a job. And then I'm waking up and I'm sitting at a computer in my house. And then there's no work. Like I don't have work.
Yeah.
So why must I sit in front of this thing? Like I've done everything I can do this morning. Why must I still sit there at like 3:00 in the afternoon?
Yeah.
Like I'm just depressing myself.
Did you, at some point in your journey, but worry in your parenting journey, worry about creating? So if you're going to expose them to your lifestyle choices around labor and work, and that maybe you should create, I don't know, something for them. Because that's my anxiety now. The thing that, look, if they don't have a strong work attitude and maybe even ethic, do I then need to then start creating little small pockets of, I don't know, it's not just money, but like opportunities to be like, oh, son, you can have this business when you're, when you're 21.
The whole conversation is about creating generational wealth. And
yeah.
I grew up in Maseru. I started working for my father from when I was like 12, 13. My father had his own business.
Yeah.
And through school, through high school, through university, I worked for my father. When I left school, I moved back home to work in businesses I had a share in because my father gave all of us shareholding.
Yeah.
And after him, I had the largest shareholding because I was the next head of the family. So all my decisions around my life, up till I was about 26, 27, when I actually came to Joburg, were always about the family. So the family took precedence. I was the continuity. I was the sustainability.
Yeah.
And I went into my father's area. So that's why also I was the one that would kind of pull close. Although I was also the first son, which from an African context. But I had my own struggles with it. I had my own battles with, I couldn't decide I want to go and do X, Y, Z because that does not ensure continuity of the businesses and therefore the family.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think maybe because of that experience and because of that journey, I do not sit and think, oh, I need to create a business for my children to be able to take over because I don't know if that's what they want to do.
Sure.
My older sister's a GP. She always wanted to do medicine.
Yeah.
I went into the family business, but did I necessarily, would I necessarily have gone that route if I had other options?
Sure, yeah.
So I see my job as providing them with the tools, emotionally, professionally, etc., for them to be, and the opportunities and the access for them to be able to go and do what it is they want to do. So the conversations I've had with my son is, have you figured out what it is that you want to do? Because even university, it's like, if you want to do something that doesn't need you to go and sit in university for 3-4 years, then, my father was a Ghanaian man born in the 1930s in colonial Africa who had a very specific view of education and was an academic.
Yeah.
But I am living and I'm raising my children in a very different time, and they do not, you're saying you dropped out of a degree.
Yeah.
They do not necessarily need to, go to university. Because of that journey, I think about that less. I have a company and I tell people, I'm not trying to scale my company. Like my company is there as a vehicle for me to be able to provide my family with everything they need.
Sure, yeah.
And my children with everything they need to get to where they're now building the lives that they want to live.
Yeah.
So my last question to close up.
Okay, cool.
You still create playlists?
I do. Not as often as I did pre and during COVID. So when my second born, Leroy, came into this world, the identity thing where you don't have a child, you're a father.
Yeah.
You know, it was like a real shift in perspective. And I just thought about my relationship to music at the time. I was also vinyl DJing at some spots in town, and vinyl DJing is not very popular. You'll get paid 3,000 rands if you're lucky. Sometimes they'll give you 300 rands in a plate and a Heineken. And as someone who's a train spotter and, you know, a digger, buying vinyls, you know, buying some of those records for like 1,000 rands each online, you have to pay shipping fees. At some point I'd wait for my wife to go to bed so I could pour myself a whiskey and shop for vinyl online. And only when the delivery came and she'd see how much I spent, and, you know, the whole thing would be a big thing in our house. And then one time during COVID, the delivery just didn't make it to our house. You know, the bought online, but because of COVID and, you know, deliveries and I don't know, and that whole system didn't work properly. Records didn't come to my house, and they were stuck at the airport post office depot for months until they just lost the shipment. I didn't get them. And I thought to myself, look, we're nesting as a family. We have a newborn in the house. We're going through a pandemic. I have to, you know, think really hard about all these things. I started reflecting around. I wanted to stop vinyl DJing and stop vinyl shopping. So I did that. And yeah, I started doing mixes for a while. And then I was like, you know what? I need to sort of focus a lot more on the thing that brings me money, which is my filmmaking. And I just stopped with the music for a while. I'm happy to say that I'm back. I'm going to be playing my first gig as a DJ at an upcoming festival called Folklore Festival. It's an arts and culture festival happening in Joburg, Pretoria, Cape Town. And it's amazing. So yeah, I'm really excited about, you know, making mixes, vinyl mixes, especially, you know, learning how to mix again on the turntables and, you know, the mixer. But, you know, digital playlists, it sustained me for some time on Spotify and Apple Music. So that's...
Yeah, because I do also... I suspect I'm not as deliberate as you, but I create a lot of playlists for myself.
Oh, okay.
But I started... I haven't done it in a while, but I borrowed an idea from Teju Cole.
Oh, okay.
The Nigerian-American author.
Yes.
Who I'm a big fan of. So on his website, he has a gang of playlists.
Oh, wow.
Like he creates these playlists essentially for himself.
Yeah.
And he has links to them on his website. So I started doing that with my site, where very specific kind of playlists. I'll actually just post it, even if it's just a link to Apple Music or Spotify. Like I'll have that on there, and if somebody wants to listen, cool. So
I must check it out. I still create for myself a lot. Like I said, you know, I kind of like use music to navigate the world in a lot of ways. And, you know, finding new music has always kind of like felt the same, like this really exciting. How do I describe it, man? Just, you know, discovering new music that you like, for me is priceless. And so I'm constantly just looking for.
Whereas I'm more in nostalgia now. Like
interesting.
It's been a couple of years. Like basically kind of music I grew up on, music that has kind of a certain meaning. And because I moved.
How far do you go? I mean, are we talking the OJs here? Are we talking 90s hip hop?
Yeah. No. Like, I was born in 1972. So, and I mean, I have a much smaller record collection than you probably have. But at the heart of my record collection is my father's record collection.
Ah, nice, yeah.
Which after he passed, I took over. And that's the music I grew up playing. Like on a Sunday, I'm woken up, I must go wash the cars. And I'll pull the speakers as close to a window as possible and turn the volume up.
Yeah.
And I'd go, and I still do that even digitally now, where I'll sit and flip through them to get a sense of what I'm in the mood for today. And then I'll play that. So I listen to music very mood driven, which means I can go from, this morning I've been on I started with like dub, reggae, a playlist that I came across the other day. And then I shifted to UK grime and hip hop because I've been a grime fan for years.
Okay.
But last week I was on Savage Garden, Nirvana, whatever. Then I'll go to Marilyn Manson. I'll go to hip hop.
Nice.
On Friday, I was at the gym and I was in the mood for New Jack Swing. So I started off with Johnny Kemp, Just Got Paid.
Nice.
Which is a song that we had a car accident out with my friend's mother's car the one day in the late 80s or early 90s. And then I just did that. So I literally, when I get in the car in the morning, my daughter was saying the other day, she's like, you listen to everything.
Oh, yeah.
I get in the car in the morning and I'll kind of, either I'll play whatever was playing the night before. I'll flip through and go, what am I in the mood for? Select that, and then that's my music for the day.
Yeah, I saw this meme recently, like this week actually, that said being a Gen X is difficult because you have Nirvana and hip hop in your head, but a lot of Phil Collins floating around too. Yeah. Just in closing, I know I'm not the one asking the questions here, but in the memory work that I do, and it's kind of had some, ways in which it's affected me personally. And I think touching on inheriting our father's records, that happened with me too. Do you do that sometimes as a way to connect with him? Because I feel like there's things that my dad passed in 1998. I was in matric. I was 17 years old. I was angry at him even. And so there was a bit of a disconnect. And I remember when we were driving, we had a puzzle shop at our home, and it was a thing where he just called me to ask him to go stock with him. So basically go buy supplies. And I didn't really treasure those moments at the time, but when I think about them now, and when I thought about them later in my life, I, was so glad they happened, because I was into rap in primary school, and at some point MC Hammer was my guy, and we used to have conversations about music, and he'd be like, oh, so who do you think is the best musician, or, the artist? And I would say, yeah, MC Hammer. And he used to say things like, yeah, but MC Hammer's not better than Charles Mingus, which is like, it's incomparable. You can't, and obviously I'd get worked up and be like, yeah, no one's better than MC Hammer, and it's so weird. He dies. I inherit all these Charles Mingus records from him, and they connect right back to those conversations in our van, driving to Germiston to buy, cabbages for our shop. But yet at the same time, I think they give me a greater insight into his sophistication outside of everything else, right? Like his knowledge, it's because it's really just about his taste. Because jazz in itself, this is what everybody listened to. And then you have, what some would call, experimental jazz, spiritual jazz. Some of these titles are a little problematic, but, sort of like very alternative stuff. And then just through consumption, you realize the level, I won't say the level of sophistication, because it's not really that, but it just kind of speaks to excess, taste, and those kind of things. For me, they were kind of really gave me a stronger image of who my dad was at heart, or just like in like his being. You know, this coupled with photo albums, and I think this was a big thing for a lot of Black communities where, you know, even just for entertainment would go through photo albums. He used to take a lot of photos as well. So for me, it started like the music started humanizing him for me, where I kind of like felt that I was connecting with, even, you know, after he was gone, connecting with him better, because there was no influence, none of his influence. Me liking Charles Mingus was none of his influence. I arrive at Charles Mingus through my own means, but then when I get the records and I connect, because I started collecting records when I was looking for hip hop samples. It's just like, oh, you know, they used this song for this De La song, De La Soul track. And then, you know, so then you're chasing that song, and then, you find out, they sampled the song. So we're always just going to record stores to find the samples. And then, I mean, it's not like we were going to do anything with them. We weren't really producing. But I think at the time, listened to Charles Mingus, and I was like, nah, this is too much, you know, this is too heavy. But when I do get a real appreciation for Charles Mingus, and I'm like, there's no way that guy who was so strict,
So the difference between us is my father passed when I was 45.
Okay.
And his music collection, and I was born, like I said, I was born in 1972. So there's a couple of years between us.
Yeah.
Which means even when hip hop came, I mean, I was fortunate to start being exposed to it like 83, 84, before they even kind of has solidified the name. Because I went to an international school and we had friends who were studying abroad, or their parents were ambassadors and stuff. So I was like, my first favorite rap group was Houdini, which is like 83, 84.
Escape.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I used to consume my father's music collection. So even my taking that collection with my siblings, if they had argued it would not have made sense to me. I'm like, I was the only person who was ever interested in them. It was my father, and then it was me. So for me, it was like a given that, and so I went home and I just took all of them, put them in my house.
Yeah.
And it's also tied to nostalgia, because those are the records I grew up playing. And those are the records I used to DJ my father's parties sometimes. So those are the records he was playing.
Okay. Yeah.
And he used to travel a lot. So most of them have a sticker with like his address on it.
Yeah.
And he's written, you know, Frankfurt 1967.
Yeah.
You know? So there is a connection.
It's direct, yeah.
But also I was fortunate enough to be around my father long enough, and for me to be old enough to recognize him, you know, strengths, flaws, to see him as a human being, as opposed to just father.
Yeah.
So that's how the music is slightly different. And then also, you know, hearing samples. I mean, I always just joke and say I used to write some early raps, but when I wanted to even think about producing and stuff, it's like, I used to say, I just have my father's record collection. Like, there's enough for me to sample in that.
Yeah, wow.
Or I'd hear something and I'd be like, no, that's from.
Yeah.
And his record collection ranged from, I have a lot of the Reader's Digest used to put out these packs, record packs. So it's like jazz of the 20s and 30s.
Yes.
And it's 10 records it's like a box set.
In a box set, yeah.
So I have all of that. And then you'd have rock and roll. I mean, there's Bill Haley and the Comets. There's the Osmonds next to Count Basie, Duke Ellington, and Louis Armstrong, next to Dark City Sisters.
Sure.
Korimo Raba and Babsim Langeni.
Yeah.
Next to the Ramblers, which is a Ghanaian high life band. Next to like Malawian and Zambian artists. And that's his collection. So when you're talking about I think how that influenced me was my ears listening for, do I enjoy it or don't I enjoy it?
Yeah. But you're exposed to it.
And that's how I interact with the world. I measure things on the basis of, do I like it or don't I like it? Do I like the way it looks?
Yeah.
Don't I like the way it looks? I think less about how it's positioned.
Yeah.
Or what it says about me. Because I grew up in a house where, from a musical perspective, there were just all these records and they're owned by the same person.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. There you were worried about what are we going to talk about.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
The Listen to Your Footsteps podcast is produced by Zebra Culture. If you have ideas of what we can do better, people you'd like us to have a conversation with, or would just like to share a thought, you can email me on info@zebraculture.com. To check out past episodes, go to kojobuffer.com/podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share with a friend. If you'd like to get a copy of the book, Listen to Your Footsteps, check out kojobuffer.com/book. There are details on the various spaces it's available at. I'd also appreciate it if you could leave a review or comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Finally, there's the Zebra Culture by Kojo Buffer newsletter, where on a weekly basis, I share a curated list of articles, playlists, videos, etc. that have caught my attention. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed having it.